Studies have found that humans usually gradually develop self-awareness at around the age of 2, and only then recognize the reflection in the mirror as themselves. The self refers to the capacity for fiction, for the self does not inherently exist, yet fiction is not equivalent to nothingness. The virtual is also a form of existence. According to the author of this book, consciousness has both an innate form and an acquired formation. Consciousness contains an innate seed meta-consciousness, and its development also requires acquired practice. Self-consciousness is an optimal outcome based on constraints. Click the plus icon to follow this account for more exciting content. Let us begin with a story, the once famous wolf child. In 1920, in Calcutta, India, people discovered two monsters walking on all fours, following three large wolves. Later, people killed the wolves and found two naked girls in the den. The elder was 7 or 8 years old, and the younger was only 2. They were sent to an orphanage. The younger died soon, and the elder lived to about 16 or 17. Although these children raised by wolves showed no essential differences in physiological structure and physical development from ordinary children, their psychological activities were vastly different. The wolf child could not speak, only utter monotonous sounds. She knew nothing about human clothing, food, housing, or transportation, and could not calculate or think. She feared and tensed up at the sight of people, crawled on hands and feet, slept curled up in dark places during the day, and prowled at night with sharp night vision. Around midnight every day, she would howl like a wolf. She feared light, fire, and water, refused to bathe, and would tear off clothes or throw off blankets even in cold weather. She sniffed around for food with an unusually sensitive nose, refused vegetarian food, and preferred raw meat not from hands, but from the ground, tearing it with her teeth instead of hands, and licking liquids. After a careful education and training, the wolf child learned to stand after 2 years, mastered 6 words after 4 years, and 45 words after 7 years. It took 6 years for her to walk upright, though she still used all 4 limbs when running fast, and she finally learned to eat with her hands and drink from a cup. At the age of 8, her intelligence was equivalent to that of a 6-month-old human infant. Before dying at 16 or 17, it was only equivalent to that of a 3 to 4-year-old child. This story shows that human psychological abilities are not innate, but products of acquired social practice. Precisely because humans engage in social labor, their intelligence far surpasses that of animals, and the human brain develops its unique advanced psychological form, consciousness. From the perspective of generation, human psychological activity is a high-level neural response of the brain to external stimuli. In content, it is a reflection of objective reality. The reason the wolf child possessed a human brain but lacked human mentality was precisely the lack of human social practice in early life. It can be said that without human social life and practice, even with a sound brain, psychological development cannot proceed normally. After returning to human society, the wolf child's psychological state gradually recovered through careful cultivation. However, having missed the critical initiation and initialization window, developmental critical period, her progress remained slow. American psychologist Jerome Kagan argued that humans are not born with self-awareness. It begins to emerge between 1.5 and 2 years of age. For example, the ability to recognize oneself in the mirror marks an important stage in the development of self-awareness. In the mirror rouge test, researchers place a red dot on an infant's forehead. If the infant recognizes the reflection as itself, it will touch its own forehead. Infants under 1.5 years old cannot recognize the person in the mirror as themselves. In the initial stage, the self exists only as an external object in the child's consciousness, so the child often refers to itself in the third person, such as Laylee wants candy. In the first few years of life, a child's consciousness and memory are fragmented and discontinuous, without obvious self-awareness. As the child grows and consciousness enriches, subjective feelings become stronger, and the child begins to use the first person to refer to itself. Humans struggle to form long-term memories before the age of 2, mainly because the hippocampus, responsible for long-term memory, is not yet fully developed. That is why we rarely remember events before the age of 2, or even 6. This does not mean early experiences are meaningless. Although specific memories are not retained, they are crucial for shaping brain abilities such as memory, spatial perception, and logical reasoning. Even when memories and impressions fade, they carry greater long-term significance. As philosopher Michael Sandel put it, the essence of learning is not to remember knowledge, but to trigger your thinking and shape the neural network structure of your brain. Reflection. Precisely because the brain lacks long-term memory capacity before the age of 2, our memory fragments at that time had no subject, meaning we had not yet formed the concept of self, or complete self-awareness. Studies have found that humans usually gradually develop self-awareness at around the age of 2, and only then recognize the reflection in the mirror as themselves. One view holds that a continuous self may be merely a beautiful illusion fiction woven by memory. The self itself is intangible and invisible. You can only feel its existence. The self refers to the capacity for fiction, for the self does not inherently exist, yet fiction is not equivalent to nothingness. The virtual is also a form of existence. A particular state of consciousness is a relational network, formed by the close interweaving of multiple factors, and cannot be completely decomposed into independent parts. The increasingly complex and subtle feelings that emerge become consciously coupled with value systems such as dopamine, giving rise to rich emotions and subjective experiences, which deepen through interpersonal interaction and emotional relationships, and thus a high-order self gradually emerges. This view carries a sense of spontaneous emergence, holding that consciousness is not produced by something else. Therefore, the consciousness we experience arises from the coordinated operation of multiple neural cell groups responsible for different functions, forming an ever-changing functional whole, known as the dynamic core. The term dynamic means our consciousness is constantly flowing and changing. Things constantly leave our attention, while new ones enter, forming a continuous stream of consciousness. Of course, consciousness can also be discontinuous, such as during epiphany or alcohol-induced blackouts. Thus, consciousness can be understood as the perception of the global spatio-temporal unity of the self long-term, continuous across past, present, and future, serving as the central hub and decision-making command center. In contrast, Plato's epistemology in ancient Greece was clearly nativist, most notably in his theory of recollection. He held that before birth, the soul, prior to entering the body, already knew the world of forms, possessing innate wisdom and knowledge. After birth, this knowledge is forgotten due to bodily interference, and learning is the process of recalling the forms known to the soul in a previous life through sensory stimulation. For example, when we see beautiful things in reality, we are reminded of the form of beauty. His theory of knowledge has mystical tendencies. True knowledge is the grasp of forms, while sensory perception yields only opinion, for the sensory world is changeable and unreal, and only knowledge of the forms is eternal and certain. Thus, Plato believed the soul encountered the world of forms in a prior existence, and can rediscover these eternal truths in this life through memory. Learning is therefore essentially a process of recollection. According to the author of this book, consciousness has both an innate form and an acquired formation. Consciousness has an innate seed, meta-consciousness, a primitive power that drives you to think continuously, like an engine. This is discussed in Chapter 5.7, 4.1, the frequency generator, meta-consciousness. Similarly, linguist Noam Chomsky argued that humans have an innate capacity for language, the theory of innate language capacity. On the other hand, the formation of consciousness requires acquired practice. Consciousness is a product of perception, interaction, and feedback with the external environment, as illustrated by the Wolfchild example and the stream of consciousness driving process discussed in Chapter 5.7. 4. The WHY neural network dynamic model of consciousness, hierarchy, and feedback. We may conjecture, since innate meta-consciousness already exists, a pure, theoretical form of consciousness, similar to Plato's world of forms, why must it be implanted into the human brain for new development? A possible answer: theoretical consciousness, though perfect like absolute mathematical perfection, lacks real meaning. The meaning of life lies in actualizing these perfect theoretical ideas into the concrete physical world. In reality, various boundary conditions, constraints, and limitations interact and counteract each other, allowing us to truly experience completeness, subtlety, and authenticity. Pure, perfect theoretical consciousness is overly rational, either too simple or unnecessarily complex. The meaning of life is to create an optimal solution under limited objective boundary conditions and constraints. Further discussions can be found in Chapters 8.2, 9.2, Why Pursue Unity, 2.34, 39. Experientialism, optimization and adaptive outcomes under bounded rationality, limited resources, time, space, and conditions. 3.9. 5. The meaning of life as constraint optimization. Without constraints, the equation has no solution. 4.144. Everything is the optimal arrangement, seeking the best choice. And 6.7. 3. The universe, born from a unified consciousness, non-personal God, pantheism. 1. The underlying logic of the acquired development of self-consciousness is optimization of an independent individual under limited, constrained conditions. Limited conditions include limited resources, time, space, rationality, etc. If one lacked nothing, there would be no need to distinguish yours from mine, nor to separate the self as an individual. Similarly, independent individuals, selfhood, even selfishness, rather than collectivism emerge because if everything were shared, there would be no need to form a separate self or individual consciousness. Optimization means that independent individuals each, uniquely responsible for their own survival, must carefully allocate resources to satisfy needs, eliminate hunger, obtain dopamine, etc. Much like evolution as an optimizing process seeking the best adaptation and fit within the environment. Thus, self-consciousness is an optimal outcome based on constraints. Constraints are the establishment of boundaries. At around 2 years old, children begin to form the concept of self and recognize the boundaries between themselves and others. As they grow, they continuously establish various boundaries, distinguishing oranges from apples, mother from father from strangers, and ethical boundaries such as good and bad. True maturity is not about being tactful, but about understanding boundaries. Of course, consciousness remains an unsolved mystery, and the content in this section is only discussion and conjecture. Many detailed questions deserve further reflection. What is the mechanism by which general anesthesia suspends consciousness? Can the fluctuating curves of emotional hormones be regarded as the clockwork, driving force, of consciousness? Is human self-consciousness initially dormant, requiring sufficient motivation to awaken? Do infants lack true self-awareness at first due to insufficient hormonal drive? Do animals also possess self-consciousness, only at a shallower level than humans? I am Wu Huaiyu, a PhD from the Chinese Academy of Sciences and a postdoctoral fellow from Peking University and the founder of AI Philosophy. For more detailed information, please refer to the complete version of this book. In addition to this short video, you can also click on my avatar to view more long videos.